Thank you, Jeffrey, for the introduction. Erev Tov.
Good evening to our guests from Israel and abroad, and to our friend, Ms. Michelle Flournoy, the Undersecretary of Defense until recently. I'm very happy for this opportunity, and since I have quite a brief time, quite a short time, to speak about the topic of this conference, the security challenges of the 21st century, then I was updated during the conference about the things that have been said here, and I will try to refrain from repeating what has already been said and seemed true and correct, and I will try to confront things that have been said and I think are incorrect in my opinion, and I will try to say some new things in certain areas that have not been said so far in this conference, and of course naturally in any subject I will talk about I will not be able to speak of or elaborate on. I will only treat my lecture as a continuation of what has already been said. And undoubtedly, when we speak of the challenges, the security challenges in the 21st century, the Middle East is undergoing these days an event or events that are dramatic, changes that are being called various names, a regional shock, a regional earthquake, the Arab Spring, the Islamic winter, I heard a new term today, a bloody sandstorm I heard today in the conference. All of these nicknames are reflecting some sort of dramatic historical event that seems to be happening once a century, and undoubtedly that in certain respects it is exciting in certain places, because people who are living in a democracy, it is exciting and enthusiastic and invigorating to see youngsters go out and protest and overthrow a dictator from the regime. But life is more complex, especially in the Middle East, and it's not as simple as that. And we see how the revolution that is being triggered by people who have been raised on Arabic values are now striving for freedom, for human rights, even for rights for women, and how these riots are now being overtaken by the more organized factors. Possibly the relevant fantasy after the Islam has been suppressed. The Sufis, Salafis, all sorts of Muslims, and the region is so unstable that it is now becoming unstable ground, and forces us to look at the potential for opportunities in this case, but also quite a few risks. And I will not go into them, I will not talk about them, but I will speak of some countries that I would like to speak of the challenges they are facing, but I would like to talk about the general event. I think that one of the things that are striking about this event is that the collapse of the Western outlook, the Western point of view in terms of the nation states that was superficially applied to tribal countries in the Middle East. Some of it was done in the Sykes-Picot Accords after World War I, and others have been imposed after the Second World War and the colonial era, and some have drawn maps on balconies in London or in other European capitals and thought that what was good for Europe and what was proven over the last few years that even there things aren't working out well as nation states, such as in the Yugoslavian incident. They thought that they would be good here for the Middle East, but it turns out that communities that are tribal, that are attempting to be nation states, although they do not have a national identity, they have a tribal identity, that proves to be very difficult unless they have dictatorships. And that is true for Iran. That is why they are split between Shiites, Kurds, Sunnis and other minorities, and that is why they have the civil war that we are seeing now, and are disgusted with all the massacres and the murders that are being carried out now in Syria, Alawis and Sunnis and Kurds and others. But what is arising from all of this is that leaders in the West thought they knew what was best for the Middle East, and they applied to this region their Western approach, and it is now collapsing in many cases right before our eyes. And of course there are economic drives here, and social drives, and a strive for freedom. But we're now seeing a collapse. We're witnessing a collapse of something that was artificial to begin with. And when we look at this, we look at this with concern. We're looking with concern at this idea, this Western idea that is being applied to this region, and I don't know when that will collapse as well, but I'm afraid it will collapse. And that is democratization through elections. Israel is the follower, or is very excited about this democratization, and we hope and pray that there are other democracies in the Middle East. But I personally believe that democratization should be carried out through education, and it's hard for me to believe in democratization through elections when there are no values in this civil society of tolerance, of patience towards others, a willingness to hear the others, freedom of speech, freedom, rights, human rights for women. When these do not exist, then these democracies will also collapse. And we see in the Gaza Strip how the Hamas took advantage of the democratic rules and automatically decided to kill the opposition, to take the reins of the regime in anti-democratic manner. But the main thing is that the elections are democratic, right? And unfortunately, these things can also happen in other places around the region, because democratization should be reached and achieved through education, not through elections. Elections should be the final stage. But from these incidents, from what has already happened and what may be happening, and I see as a failure, we are seeing these mistaken, these erroneous Western conceptions, and it's not what I'm seeing. And these conceptions, these conceptual mistakes, that, as I view them, that have brought to the initial mistake 90 years ago, and is also leading to this mistake as well. Sometimes it's ignorance. The Middle East is not really properly understood, and then you just sort of draw a map that divides tribes, and you don't understand what you're doing, and you think that you can put together different tribes and it'll be a nation state, because that's the Western outlook. And sometimes it's naivety, and the Western people come and they want to do good, and they even support financially certain elements in order to advance them and make sure that they're happy, and sometimes they're just being naive, and sometimes it's wishful thinking. We want to think that what's good for us will be good for them, and so forth. A lot of it is is patronism. That's how you reach. When there's solutionism, you're reaching problems, because you think you have the solution, and that is what's prominent in the mistakes that we are doing now in the conflict, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And when we believe that there is a solution, then the conceptual phenomenon that comes again that makes a mistake is nowism. We want the solution, and we want it now. We wanted peace now. We want democracy now. We want a lot of things here and now. And when it doesn't work, then we blame ourselves. I heard from quite a few people how we are to blame, because there's no peace in the Palestinians, because of the Likud, because of the settlements, how Israel is to blame, and all sorts of allegations and all sorts of self-accusations, and saying that it's our fault. It's very easy to blame ourselves, because when you blame ourselves, then you're no longer helpless. You're saying it's my problem, it's not his problem. The Islamic Jihad, what are we going to do with it? As soon as you say, oh, maybe we weren't good enough with them, we didn't behave nicely with them, maybe we should give them more money, maybe we should make concessions, then it's up to us. And then we're making grave conceptual mistakes again and again. They are strategic mistakes, because we are accusing ourselves and blaming ourselves. And when I look at the countries around us and what is happening in them, I would like to say a few words about Egypt. Undoubtedly, Egypt is a very important country, and it is now very busy with itself. It has stepped away from the role that it has played in the past. But the State of Israel, and anyone who is looking for stability in the region, has to look to Egypt and to follow with concern and hope what is happening in Egypt right now. And I think that any Egyptian leadership, a president will be elected soon, we already have a parliament, we will have a government in Egypt, will have to face challenges, 3 challenges that are very difficult. An economic challenge that is now seems impossible. It requires attention, it requires everyone getting on board, internationally speaking, to see how we can take Egypt out of its economic crisis. The second challenge is a security challenge. The borders are open, weapons are coming in from Libya, from Sudan. The Sinai Desert has become very problematic. The border with the Gaza Strip is very problematic. We're having terrorist cells of Al-Qaeda and Islamic Jihad and World Jihad. And they're not only in Sinai, they're also in the Egyptian mainland. And it's definitely problematic. And not only, not to mention the other law and order problems that are affecting the civilians, the citizens in Egypt who are being mugged and attacked. And the third challenge is the political one, which we are not intervening in, but all the struggles between the various forces, whether it's the security institutions and the Islamic movements and the frustrated liberalists whose protest has been overtaken and taken out of their hands, and so forth. So the political aspect Israel is not intervening with, but in terms of the economic aspect, I wish Egypt would agree to more cooperation, because Israel has a lot to offer it. We also know this from Mubarak's regime. They are sensitive about cooperation with us. And it's to their detriment, and I hope it will change. And in terms of the security, whoever looks through the security prism on what's happening in Egypt, then you think that the border with Egypt is the least threatening, because in terms of Sudan, there's mostly weapons, and in Libya, there's mostly mobs and clans, such as from Libya and the Mujahideen, and whether this is going into Sinai, whether it's going into the Gaza Strip. Tehran over the Red Sea, is it unstable? Gaza Strip is unstable. It's also taking out terrorist attacks in Sinai. So probably the least threatening border is the one with Egypt. But we definitely have a cooperation with Egypt. We have mutual enemies. We also have other mutual interests. And I wish that the stability in Egypt will enable us to expand our cooperation in all the areas. And we also hope that whatever leadership rises to power will be committed to the peace accords with us. And in that respect, I would say that as long as the American policy speaks of a connection between financial aid from America to Egypt and its commitment, the Egyptian commitment to the Israeli peace accords, we will hear even the Islamists speaking of the option of maybe reviewing the peace accords but not disregarding them. And I think that we'll be able to do that in the not-so-far future. In Syria, we have seen terrible pictures from Syria, from Homs, from Michule. We have seen bodies of children and men and women who have been slaughtered by agents of Bashar al-Assad. And these all reflect the attempt by the regime to suppress the protests, even in the presence of observers. And I think that this is like an attempt to extinguish fire with wind. I don't think that any side can overcome the other. I don't think they can overcome the opposition, but the opposition can also not topple the regime. And despite the attacks and despite that, and I'm not talking about Al-Qaeda's and all sorts of others, I'm talking about the opposition in Syria. I think that also here, sooner or later, Bashar al-Assad will be forced to step down. And I don't want to speak of a schedule. Maybe it will be sooner if he'll be assassinated, or later if the parties cannot somehow overcome and win. The fact that the outside forces that are helping Bashar al-Assad in his slaughter, and that reflects, that shows us that they are afraid that there is an axis of evil axis that is acting against Israel, and toppling Bashar al-Assad's regime will be a big blow on that axis, the axis from Tehran through Damascus to Lebanon to the Gaza Strip, and strikes us but also is detrimental to Western interests in the region. When we're looking at the strategic structure, the new strategic structure of the Middle East following a year of protest and revolutions, there is definitely a change in the key players. If Egypt was once the leader in the Sunni Arab camp, it is now busy with its own problems, and who is leading the Sunni Arab camp is Saudi Arabia. Opposite it is Iran, who is leading the Shiite camp, and then we have Turkey on the side, which is neither Sunni nor Arabic in its ways. All of these are looking for regional hegemony, and another player we have is Israel, who is not torn between Sunnis and Shiites and doesn't want impact or hegemony, but it's there as well. Between Iran and Saudi Arabia, there is an ongoing struggle, a bloody struggle, whether it's a collision between its agents or collision between its institutions, whether it's in vis-à-vis Bahrain and the attempt to topple this Sunni regime. There are assassinations of by Sunni soldiers to Yemenite soldiers on the border of Iran and Saudi Arabia. And we have proxies, problem of proxies. The Saudis are financing Sunni elements in Iran, and the Iranians are financing some Sunni elements in Iraq, as long as Iraq is unstable. And there is a struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran in Lebanon. The Iranians are supporting Hezbollah, whereas the Saudi Arabia are supporting the Sunnis. The same happens in Syria. The Iranians support Bashar al-Assad, and the Saudi Arabians are supporting the Sunnis. In terms of Turkey, Turkey is striving towards hegemony in another way. It does not have terrorism. It does not support proxies. It tries to impact in its own way, especially in the Islamic countries, in the former USSR. You'll see culture centers there, universities there in the Balkan states. You'll see mosques there financed by the Turkish government, and they are involved in many of the disputes and conflicts in Syria and in other places. They are also taking sides here with us, and they're siding with Hamas, and that is the Turkish attempt to influence and impact in its own way. Turks do not use terrorism. And of course, as far as we're concerned, Turkey is a very important country, and unfortunately the relationship between Israel and Turkey has deteriorated. It was not our initiative. The deterioration did not begin with a flotilla that tomorrow we commemorate 2 years to it. It began with a decision by the regime, by the government, headed by Erdogan, spearheaded by Erdogan, to change Turkey from within to make it more Islamic. We saw it happen gradually in a very sophisticated manner, and also with the orientation, the political regional association and orientation. I also felt this as the head of general staff in 2004. It did not begin with a flotilla 2 years ago. Maybe it was one of the peaks, but it did not start there. And I hope that after all we will find mutual interest between Turkey and Israel, and we will open and reopen channels of communication so that the relationship is improved. The commercial contacts have not been harmed, but the political ones have. When Turkey began to side with our enemies, we have seen intelligence and have seen technological know-how passed on to our enemies, and that is why the relationship has cooled down and become less intimate. But I do hope that we find the way to go back. I personally tried. I've been sent to Turkey to try and reach some sort of agreement. We have done everything we could to get some sort of agreement. But after 2 rounds of talks, there were 3 rounds, but after 2 rounds of talks, we saw that we were they wanted us to go down on our knees, and they didn't really want to solve the problem, especially after the Palmer report didn't come out so well. And in that respect, even with all the discussions and disagreements, I am leaning on Bernard Lewis's statement, but at some point he said that if you go down on your knees in this case, then Turkey will not appreciate you, not as friends and not as enemies. And that probably can be applicable to the Middle East. So the last development is also vis-a-vis the IDF officers, and we also have Gabi Ashkenazi here, who is the former head of staff, chief of general staff. This is not a good development, but we know how to deal with this as a country. Unfortunately, over a decade I have refrained from going to England. This last 12 months I did go because finally England has changed its legislation. I came across very embarrassing events in both New Zealand and Spain, and also even in the United States. Some sort of civil lawsuit in the District of Columbia court was overruled and rejected by the judge, and I keep getting backed up by the Israeli judicial system and by the IDF soldiers, and I did not go to England, and I stayed alive. So if a few people don't go to Turkey, we'll all still be alive, and we will protect them. And I kept telling my officers and my soldiers, and I was still wearing uniform, that when we swear to protect our country to the death, then if we don't have to, then if the price to pay is not to go to a certain country, that's a light price to pay. And I hope this situation will also be resolved to the satisfaction of both countries, both Turkey and Israel. One of the topics that has been a focus in this conference is the Iranian topic, and rightly so. This is definitely a critical time, and I think the discussion that at times it is difficult to exhaust it, and especially when you only have half an hour or a 20-minute panel, it's a discussion that is not very simple. I think we need to focus on the basics. Undoubtedly, the Iranian threat is not just a threat to Israel, but Israel is considered the small Satan, while the United States is the big Satan. And the Iranians do not only speak, they also do. And it is not only religious ideology or a religious faith, it is an ideology that is translated to politics, to strategy, that Iranians are implementing on a daily basis, whether it's in their actions in Afghanistan against the coalition forces, whether it's in Iraq against the stability, whether it's in Lebanon when it comes to Hezbollah and the attempt to make it there, whether it's in Bahrain, in Yemen, in the Palestinian Authority, and in the support of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and all of these other forces in the Gaza Strip. This is Iran, and that is why we say very clearly this is not a theoretical challenge. This is not North Korea. This is a regime with a hegemonic aspirations. They have apocalyptic, messianic approaches, and due to that, it is our responsibility to stop this non-conventional regime to have non-conventional capabilities, i.e. nuclear power, and I wish we could stop it some other way and not use the military option. Like me, I have been through wars, and other people who have been through wars know that the military option is important for it to be the last resort. But if we look at the dilemma that has come up here, being bombed or bombing, then yes, you have to think about the day after, and we've heard different scenarios. Some I completely do not accept. But if this is the dilemma, then ultimately we should strike. We should in no way allow Iran to drop the bomb on us. And the conference here, everybody has said what the implications are. We can talk about this for another half an hour, but I think we shouldn't. It's redundant. I think the ramifications are clear in Washington, the ramifications are clear in London, Paris, Berlin, Rome, and so forth, even in Moscow, even in Beijing, and I know what I'm talking about. But as for what we should do, so there are already nuances, there are already crises in the countries. There's a matter of urgency, when we should do it, what we should do, a matter of policy, and we are currently in a process whereby the economic financial sanctions have finally been increased, but there is so much more to be done. And there is ongoing negotiation. There is a second round already in Istanbul, Baghdad, and almost we're up to a third round in Moscow, and the Iranians are still going on with their program. I'll just give you the statistics. The findings, what the Iranians have done while we've been negotiating with them over the last 3 months, including throughout the negotiations. And when we're talking about and looking about whether they're going to give up the 20% or not give the 20%, 10,000 centrifuges are going around and around, and 750 kilograms of uranium has been enriched to 3.5% level, so more than 10% of the entire quantity of uranium over the last years. So this is uranium being enriched to the point of 3.5%. 36 kilograms was enriched in these 3 months to the 20% level. And that is more than a third of the uranium enriched to that level is currently in its hands. And every month that goes by, 12 more kilograms of uranium are being enriched. So Iran, with all the pressures and with all the negotiations, so far is laughing all the way to the bomb. And there's no sign from it that it is being threatened or intimidated, even though it is struggling financially, and the sanctions are definitely taking their toll. But the regime has yet to face the real dilemma, and that is the objective. That should be the goal of anyone dealing with this matter of Iran. They're not in this dilemma of survival or reaching a bomb. And we think that the problem is that the leadership in Tehran is not convinced that the West, headed by the United States, P5+1, or in whatever format or forum, they are not convinced of the West, because the West is hesitant to go all the way to bring them to the verge of that dilemma, whether it's in terms of military or diplomatic approaches, and that is because it has an impact on the price of oil. And we think we should be paying more on oil in the longer range if that prevents the bomb, rather than allowing Iran to have the bomb, and then they will have regional hegemony, and then they will be in control of many other places in the Middle East. And time is ticking, and the clock is ticking, and the working assumption in Iran is that in 2012 nothing will happen. Is it true? Is it not true? That's what they think, because there's elections in the United States, because they know the West and so forth and so on, and they are associating the American military strike with the Israeli military strike, and therefore they think there is not a green light for the Israeli strike, and therefore they are immune, at least until the elections. And therefore we don't see them coming to negotiations with a feeling of urgency, even to offer what was resounded in the media to perhaps close up COM and so forth and so on. And our stance and our position is clear. For them not to have the capability, they should stop enriching even to 3.5% level. They should take out all the material from the country, and they should close up the facility in COM. And these days there is not even a discussion or a dispute over whether it's a military project or not. And ostensibly there is not even an argument about whether there is a project, because everybody knows that we should just stop them from having nuclear military capabilities. But there are some differences as to the red lines, and the feeling Iran has is that it can at least reach a state of having being a threshold country, because if the red line is when Khamenei decides that the bombs should be manufactured, but no, they shouldn't even have the capability to be in the position of being able to reach that decision to manufacture the bomb. And if we're talking about a red line whereby Khamenei reaches the decision, then I'm also speaking as the head of the Mossad. Why should we wait for him to decide that he wants the bomb. We know that the Iranians are lying. We know that the IAEA was not the one who found Qom, who discovered all these places. The IAEA did not know about Natanz either. They didn't know about them soon enough. And when it comes to the decision to manufacture, the Minister of Defense of the American Secretary of Defense said that within a year they could reach a reactor, a nuclear reactor. And if we do thwart this, then if they I will not speak of specific incidents. I don't want to embarrass colleagues whether as to disputes we had over various instances, but this situation is that we are playing into the hands of the Iranians if we're doing it this way. And I don't think everything is lost, and I wish that in the near future we will be seeing a position that forces the Iranians to reach this dilemma of surviving or reaching a bomb, and some of the sanctions will also be imposed on July 1st, and perhaps it will bring the regime to the understanding that they can either survive or have a bomb. But the concern that is rising and has also been resonated by the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister is a very real concern. And undoubtedly the international forces headed by the United States are giving us a chance to bring Iran to this dilemma. But in light of what is happening so far and in light of the rounds of negotiation, we see no sign of the Iranians understanding and believing that there is a system that is insistent on stopping the Iranian project, mostly because there is great sensitivity to the prices of oil, and the superpowers' objective should be to change this perception of the Iranians. In addition,
in view of the negative involvement of the Iranian regime in many conflicts in this region, my conclusion is that you cannot stabilize the Middle East without coping with the Iranian regime. We cannot stabilize Afghanistan, Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and the Palestinian arena without coping with the Iranian regime. This is a sine qua non, although it's not enough. And what about the Palestinians? I think that the Prime Minister clarified the policy when he said that we do not want to control them. But in fact, the Palestinians benefit from a political independence now as well, not one entity, two, according to their choice. One's in the Gaza Strip, the Hamas government, the other in Judea and Samaria, the Fatah government, let's call it this way. The one that is hostile, okay, you have to deter it, because the quartet also manages to deter it if you follow the situation there quite successfully. Judea and Samaria, we keep saying all the time, the Palestinian Authority, the chairman is PLO, Abu Mazen, we're ready for negotiations immediately, without preconditions. This is the way we acted in view of the quartet's letters. We did the same thing when we went to Amman, and that's what we're doing today as well. However, they're not going to push us to discuss territory without discussing the other issues. Because when you discuss territory with Palestinians, they like it very much. They only get, but they don't give. And I think that one of the things in view of the discussion here today as well about the paradigm, there's one thing that we have to understand. As far as I'm concerned, anybody who thinks that this conflict started with the borders of 67 and it'll end with 67 just doesn't understand the conflict, and will not be able to explain why Abu Mazen refused Olmert after Annapolis, when the Secretary of State at the time said it's surprising in its generosity, and she ran to Abu Mazen to Ramallah, and she was very surprised by his immediate refusal. He didn't even want to discuss it. Also, when he went to Bush, he refused immediately, and anybody who's surprised by that doesn't understand that as far as Abu Mazen is concerned, the occupation, as he calls it, is not from 67. It's 48. Listen to his speech in the General Assembly. 63 years of occupation, he said, not 44. But I'm checking him not just in his political terminology, even in English in this case, or in Arabic. I check the textbooks in schools, and I'm saying it in the most clear way. The first indication for the change of the Palestinian narrative that doesn't really recognize the right of Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people, even denies the existence of the Jewish people. They say it's a religion, it's not a nation, why should they have a state, etc. So it's true. They said in Oslo that they recognize two states, the state of Israel, not as a Jewish state. And then they tell us, so why do you insist with them? You didn't insist with Egypt and Jordan. We insist with them because they're negating our right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people, which didn't happen with Egypt and Jordan. There was never such a dispute. Sadat didn't have a demand for Sheikh Munis, which is here in Tel Aviv. Neither did King Hussein, but Arafat and Abu Mazen, they do have a demand. You can see it in the textbooks. But there, the entire land of Israel is Palestine, and there's no other place. And the children learn that the occupation is since 48, and they learn that there's no connection between the Jews and the land of Israel. As long as they study this, you can sign many agreements, but they'll go up in fire like it did with Arafat at the time. And the paradigm should start with agreeing on the diagnosis. Otherwise, the prognosis is not going to be. And when you understand that, you understand why Abu Mazen refused the generous proposal, why Arafat was ready to negotiate with Barak at the time, started a war right after in order to avoid the American pressure at the time. You can understand also the Arab refusals of 47 and 37. This is persistent, and unfortunately it hasn't changed. Anybody who thinks that it's going to change by a declaration, we're going to a unilateral process, on the contrary, it's not going to change. It gives a tailwind to those people who think that you need patience, because eventually the Zionist entity is going to fold up, either through a unilateral withdrawal or the new ideas of all sorts of things, and staying in Judea and Samaria, etc. And if you want to bring Abu Mazen to the table, shouldn't raise such ideas. What reason does he have to come to the table if there's an option that we're going to decide by ourselves to leave? If it would bring us to peace and quiet, okay, but he doesn't say it. And we asked 3 questions as the government. It was in the speech of Bar Ilan and then in the Congress, and we got very clear answers. And we said this is not prerequisite to go into negotiations. We are waiting for you, but around the table you have to know we're going to raise these questions. We're not going to talk only about territory, because we want to talk about everything, but we have 3 questions. First, in a permanent agreement with borders that are agreed, will you recognize us to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people? And they said never. Abu Mazen said never. How come? You're the state of Israel. We are the Palestinian state. You're the state of Israel. There's Jews, Arabs, all sorts. You're not a Jewish state. Completely against all the decisions of the International Institute, from the Balfour Declarations and the UN resolution. And he continues as if everything is okay. And we're saying, in connection to that, will you be ready that there'll be an agreement on agreed borders, agreed by both sides, will be the end of the conflict? And he says, how come there are 5 million refugees, he says. This is a rare phenomenon, doesn't exist in the world, that the number of refugees from 48 goes up by day. And they inherit the refugeeism from one generation to the other. And this is something we cannot ignore, a special mechanism that deals with the Palestinian refugees. They're no longer refugees. What is a refugee? Somebody who was derooted from his home, but after the 5th generation they live in houses, some of them in Nablus and in Jenin and in Gaza. True, some of them in Lebanon and in Jordan and Syria, but they don't live in tents. And the 5th generation is still considered refugees, and until the last one is not satisfied, it's not the end of the conflict. More than that, says Abu Mazen, the Arabs of 48. As far as he is concerned, he's talking about 1.5 million Arabs that live in Israel as our citizens, namely that the conflict doesn't end with the borders of 67. He never said that it starts or ends in 67. He talks about the right of return, etc., etc. And the third question we're asking, of course, is the security, one with the bitter experience that we have, because instead of territories for peace, you know that Oslo brought about more than 1,000 casualties, and in Gaza, the disengagement brought about the rockets. Okay, we got territory for rockets. And that's why it's important to talk about an Israeli unilateral step. This is a negative incentive for Abu Mazen to come to the table. And many people experience that. If we withdraw from here and for there, it's the perceptual mistake, because we think it's territorial. The Western person said, you want territory, okay, I want peace, I want quiet. We'll give him the territory and finish the story. No. They even say it's going to strengthen the moderates, it's going to weaken the extremists. Exactly the opposite. We have the same experience in the north and in the south. So again, this idea, I don't understand where it's coming from. And that's why he has to get off the public discourse. And then they say, but what's going to happen? And what's going to be the end? So again, it goes for the solutionism and nowism. We have to talk about a way, not about the solution. And in this way, to make sure that our interests are maintained. And those who talk about interim agreements, there's no interim agreement now. If something good came out of Oslo, that they have political independence, they don't have to vote to the Knesset, they vote for their own parliament. Good. Let them manage their own life. It's true that it's not a stable situation, but it's going to be more stable in the borders of 67. When we divide Jerusalem, then it's going to be more stable. So this rendered to a solution, instead of talking about a way and to strengthen the interests, whether with the stick or with the carrot, this is the correct way. And that's why we as a government say, okay, you don't have a strategy. We have a strategy. We're ready to sit at the table immediately if there's a partner. I understand that the team here also got to the conclusion that there's no partner, right? But leave this erroneous paradigm that it's a territorial conflict around 67, and stability will be only if Israel retreats. You can live with this current situation without moving. They manage their own life in Jenin, in Nablus, in Ramallah, until somebody will understand over there that there's no other choice. We have to talk differently with the Jews. That's it, but we're not there. And statements regarding unilateral steps are making holes in this iron wall. And such a stand, again, this is a paradox in Western eyes, brings about quiet and peace. When we retreat or withdraw and we show weakness and we show them that they can, the terror stops. So that's a paradox. So that's why I think that beyond the issue that we're ready to sit at the table, we have to advance many things bottom up, as we're doing. Economy, of course, governance, which depends on them, law and order, with an American assistance, a good reform, security. I have a few reservations, but never mind. But the key is education. As long there's no educational reform, kids of 3 years old learn how to put vests of ammunition around them, it's not going to work. The first sign for me for a change will be there. As long as it doesn't exist in the schools, you can live with the current situation. Of course, it's not a status quo. We have to improve all the time and to coordinate all the time and to try to find some sort of processes. Maybe, after all, the penny dropped. But as long as it doesn't, we cannot make mistakes. The subject one before last, the relations between Israel and the United States. There's no question that they're very important to the state of Israel, and I think to the states as well. I think here in the hall we have a few Israelis who thanked the President of the States because of its contribution. I had two of those, one as the head of intelligence and one as the chief of staff. The very good, stable, based relationships on interests and mutual values. They're not conditioned on daily events or some people here and there. But even among friends, there are sometimes controversies. And I can say that most of them are out of mutual respect and the right way in order to enable of both sides of the oceans to make the right resolutions for the benefit of the national security of both countries. And to conclude, the picture around us in the neighboring countries, in this tough neighborhood of ours, which is called the Middle East, does not indicate a potential for regional stability in the short term. But to date, the various factors are busy, especially with themselves rather than with the State of Israel, except for Iran and their the annexes like Hezbollah and Hamas. The extremism of the Islam, on the one hand, don't herald good news for the region. It's not just us, but I think they don't announce good news to the Arabs as well. But as long as this extremism is not benefiting from economic wealth, I think they will not be able to mobilize a hostile coalition against the State of Israel. And in fact, we'll have to cope with terrorism and rockets, and we'll have to cope with missiles, and we'll have to deal with the Iranian threat. But I don't see an Arab coalition completely armed, as we saw in the past, when the Arab states were all armed for free by the Soviet Union at the time of the Cold War. Also, these dramatic changes in the region create opportunities for allies and for cooperations, even without agreements, with states and groups around us, alliances and coalitions that are based on interests and not just on agreements that are legal. In any case, the more Israel will know how to take advantage of the time. And some of the statements here is that the time works against us. I don't agree with that. I think the time works for the benefit of those who take advantage of it, just as the forefathers of Zionism did in a much more difficult physical situation. In order to invest, we have to develop human infrastructure, education, and also physical infrastructure all over the country. And that we're doing. Our national soundness is not just foreign affairs and security, it's also based on social and national cohesiveness, and we have to take care very soon to bridge the gaps that were developed in the Israeli society for the benefit of a just and cohesive society, and also for the benefit of our society and its strength, and also the individuals in it. And all that also for the benefit of our possibility to live and sustain the external threats. The change today is that whatever is at the test is not the military force. It's important in order to deter. It's important time of stress. But in the recent wars or the recent military operations, we were never required to all the power as we did last time in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And it's good that this is the way, but what is at the test now is our sustainability as a society and the question of cohesiveness, the faith in our way. Terms like patriotism, these are the soft components that create the power and sustainability. And they're so required at this time, not only because it's true for a healthy society, but also because of the external threats. We have to deal with the challenge of equality, and we're talking about the ultra-Orthodox. That's also is important. And actually, there are a few issues. I'm not going to elaborate, governance and other things, that the government of national unity is a wonderful opportunity to deal with these challenges, and we cannot miss this opportunity. Thank you very much.